Recruiting has come a long way since the beginning of time, from can't miss prospects to some of the biggest busts that we've seen in recent memory. Well, today, with the guys like John Emery and many others that have transferred out, and we consider them to be busts now from the recruiting landscape, it's time I looked back on some of the biggest busts that every SEC team has had since 2000. What's going on, SEC Unfiltered fam? My name is Lucas Hill here with SEC Unfiltered. Please do us a favor, like, share, and subscribe to the YouTube page. Also, check out the podcasts wherever you get your podcasts, whether it be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get it. Also, check out the website over at secunfiltered.com for more SEC content from the best SEC entity on the internet. Today's video has been brought to you by our good friends over at RHOBACK. If you guys haven't heard of them before, you got to check them out. We could not be more pumped to work with RHOBACK. It is simply the most comfortable gear that we own, from the performance polos to the hoodies and shorts, for the best fit and the best feel. The Azalea collection just got released not too long ago. It's the best time of the year to wear them. You know, Super Regionals are coming up. You also got the College World Series starting next week as well. Get you a little road trip down to Omaha, and why not go down there with some of the best gear out there from our good friends over at RHOBACK. They got that. They got the performance polos. So go ahead and go check them out. Use code SECU over at RHOBACK.com. Give you 20% off your first purchase through the end of the week. That's RHOBACK. 20% off all bottoms, polos, hoodies, and more with code SECU. So starting off this list, we're going to go just from, there's no particular order in this list, but these are every single bust that every SEC team has had. So starting off with the Texas Longhorns, it's Garrett Gilbert. So as a sophomore in high school, Lone Star Gridiron's Chris Dole labeled him, this is in 2006, the best high school quarterback I've ever seen. Make no mistake, this is after one game as well. This is his first start too. I mean, he's playing at Lake Travis High School. This is in Texas, of course, so people are going to up the ante up with this as well. After his initial head coach left to go be the next head coach at Duncanville, Arkansas fans will love this. Guess who his next head coach was? Chad Morris. Came to town, led them to back-to-back state titles. Former college head coach Jackie Sherrill, who was at Texas A&M a while back, he called Garrett Gilbert the best quarterback that he has ever seen since Dan Marino. So Gilbert entered Texas with a lot of hype. I mean, this is a guy, he's going to be sitting behind Colt McCoy. He's going to learn for his redshirt freshman year, and then he's going to go into 2010. He's going to adapt those skills. Nope. He has to come in during the biggest moment of his career in the BCS National Championship in 2010 against Nick Saban in Alabama. So overall, did he do bad? Not really. But he also went 15 of 40. I think he threw for just under 200 yards, had 2 touchdowns, but also threw 4 interceptions and lost a fumble as well that led to an Alabama score. He had another pick that led to a score. But he did lead them back to back-to-back scoring drives in which Texas was able to cut the deficit to just 3. Unfortunately, the Crimson Tide ended up running away with this. The very next year, he came in. Obviously, he's going to be the starter this year, but there wasn't a lot of talent around him. That was the problem throughout the majority of his career, is that he just never had a chance with some great talent, because after that 2009 season, you got to think about this. He's the next quarterback up because you had Vince Young, who won a national title. You had Colt McCoy, which I already mentioned, led them to a national title. And now he's next in line. Now Texas fans are thinking the same thing. Maybe he's going to do the same. Nope. Struggled with turnovers, had accuracy issues. I think his sophomore year, I think he finished with 10 touchdowns to just 17 interceptions. And then Mac Brown said after the year, job's up for grabs. Going into, I think, his junior or redshirt sophomore year, ends up 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, loses the job. He ends up transferring to SMU, spends 2 years in the June Jones offensive system, does pretty well, does enough to get drafted in the 6th round, and spent 8 years in the league. But he could have been so much better if he had just been surrounded with a good amount of talent and a terrific offensive system. I think if he doesn't play in that BCS national title game, he gets a lot more comfortable going into next year. But I guess we'll never know. So coming in at at our next team, obviously we have the Oklahoma Sooners. Many of you will think that it's Rhett Bomar. So if you remember Rhett Bomar, he was, I think, either number 1 or number 2 quarterback in the class of 04. And he was expected to take over for Jason White after he left. So he comes in, I think he starts the last 2 or 3 games of the season in 2005. Ends up doing well, leads them to a bowl win against Oregon. And then he ends up getting dismissed because of some work that he never did. But it's not him. It's Jeremy Calhoun. Here was a guy that came in as the number 1 running back in the class of 2008, and he was supposed to be a star. Many analysts labeled him as the best running back prospect since Adrian Peterson. That's a lot coming out of high school. And I could see it a lot. He had the power and he had the speed to go along with it. So he redshirts his first year in 2008, and then going into 2009, I mean, look at the depth chart that this team had. You had DeMarco Murray, who was the starter. We know what happened to them. Many people forget about Chris Brown, who I think ran for over 1,000 yards at one point during the season. But, I mean, when Calhoun got lost in the backfield, he didn't really get a lot of opportunities. Only finished with just 45 carries for 220 yards. He did have his best game, ran for 15 carries and 94 yards, I want to say. But, I mean, this was a guy that had a lot of potential. Ended up transferring to Angelo State. So, didn't do bad. Didn't do bad at all. But overall, very disappointing career for him. Could have been a lot better. Unfortunately, depth issues and also struggled with injuries as well. Just never became what he was expected to be coming out of high school. And the next one, got the Vanderbilt Commodores. So many of you are thinking, well, what does Vanderbilt have? Well, some notable guys. You had Jay Cutler that came in. And in that same class as Jay Cutler, you had a guy named Chris Young. So he never became anything near what he was supposed to be. He was the number 12 receiver in the class of 2000. And I think he was the number 110th best overall prospect in the nation. He was better than Ronnie Brown, Cameron Wake, and Jason Peters. He had a stepbrother or a half-brother or someone like that on the team. So Vanderbilt ended up landing him. It was a big recruiting upset at the time. Many people were thinking, oh man, Vanderbilt just got their star. They just got their skill guy that can be an elite receiver, and a lot of DBs are going to be shaking in their boots. But that never came to be. He struggled with his footwork, never could get up on the depth chart, and overall, it's Vanderbilt. So, I mean, it wasn't a great offensive system for him to be in, and he ended up just not being a remarkable receiver. Best receiving season was just when he had over 204 yards. But you think about what could have been when Jay Cutler and Chris Young on the outside. But obviously, that never came to be. For Mississippi State, I got Darren Williams. He was the number 1 safety according to Rivals.com. He started his career okay. It didn't really, nothing really spectacular happened. He was a consistent player. But then before his senior year started, Sylvester Croom ended up dismissing him for a violation of team rules. Ends up transferring to Jacksonville State. And then, unfortunately and tragically, he was shot to death right after his 23rd birthday, before he would have entered the NFL draft. We do send our prayers out to him and his family, and that his legacy will not just be remembered for this, but remembered for so much more. But overall, Williams was a good player, but wasn't really what he was expected to be when he came to Starkville. And at number 5 on this list, I have Enrique Davis. He was the most highly touted prospect to come out of Florida in the class of 2008. But because of his grades, he ended up having to go to Hargrave Military Academy. Finally got qualified, but just could never see the field because of injuries and a lot of depth in that Ole Miss backfield. There was a lot of stars during the late Houston Nutt era. When he went to Hargrave, he just got better and better. But he ended up, I think he played 3 years, only ended up with over 800 yards rushing. But overall, when you're a guy that's really big coming out of Florida in a football school, a football state, any other state that you're in, you're probably a 4 or 5 star. But there's so much depth in the state of Florida, it's hard for you to really get noticed. But Enrique did a great job of getting himself out there, and especially at a school like Mosley. But unfortunately, just never became who he thought to be. So coming up next on our list for South Carolina, it's Demetrius Summers. Now, I talked with our own Chris Phillips about him earlier in the week. He said he could have been a massive impact. The problem was he couldn't stay off the weed. So he was better in the class of 2003. Running back rankings featured him and Reggie Bush as the top 2. Summers was better than him. Led the team in rushing back-to-back years during the Lou Holtz era. But whenever he failed a drug test, I think it was for the second time, Steve Spurrier comes in and kicks him off. So a lot of potential was made of him. He was a very big-time guy. I mean, this was a dude that had a lot of potential, very shifty in the backfield. He was a big running back, too. And he would have made a big impact with South Carolina and the offense that was to be when Steve Spurrier came to town. So he is currently, I believe he's in jail for distributing crack cocaine. Of course, this report was from 2011 or 12, so obviously I could be mistaken. But overall, Summers had a fantastic high school career that could have gone so much more if he had just stayed off the weed. So at LSU, let's see if you Tiger fans remember Ryan Perrilloux. Remember when he said Jamarcus who? Remember when he said that he would win the Heisman during his freshman year? This guy initially committed to Texas in the class of 2005. He was labeled as the next Donovan McNabb. The problem was he couldn't get on the field until his redshirt sophomore year. Then ended up getting kicked off the team for failing a drug test because of marijuana going into the 2008 season. Now, during the 2007 season, he showed flashes of why he was a fantastic quarterback. He got it. He played in all 12 games, did well when he had his opportunities, started the SEC championship game too, and won the MVP as well. I mean, he did a fantastic job of guiding that team, taking over for Matt Flynn. He was supposed to have some plays that was designed for him going into the national title against Ohio State, but I think he only played like 2 or 3 snaps. But, I mean, that offense was clicking under Matt Flynn as well. So, after that, he ends up going to Jacksonville State, and he ended up going undrafted, but signed with the Giants afterward. Spent a couple years there, got a Super Bowl as well. So, there was a lot of potential for him, and there was recently a little interview that was done with him from WAFB, our affiliate here in Baton Rouge. Said that he should have matured a lot more whenever he was at LSU. He regrets some of the decisions that he made, but I'm glad that he did as well. So going to Texas A&M, there's Speedy Noil. Speedy Noil was a stud coming out of Edna Karr High School. Played quarterback and receiver, 5-star guy. There's a reason why they called him Speedy. If you look at his highlight tape, you could see nothing but defenders on their face whenever they tried to tackle him. He was so electric whenever he caught the ball. and he found open space, he was going to take it and go. Now, during his freshman year, he led the team in all-purpose yards. However, he ran into some trouble during his time in College Station, got arrested for, I believe it was possession or it was a DWI, but never had the same level of production. The only reason people know Speedy Noil is when Mac Wilson destroyed him on a kickoff return for what was a potential target. And that's up for debate still to this day. But overall, Noil just couldn't find a position. They didn't know whether to put him on kickoff, punt return, receiver, running back, or even play some quarterback as well, because that's what he played whenever he was at Carr. So overall, didn't really get an opportunity to showcase it in the NFL. So he's just now a regular dude. Going to Missouri, Dorial Green-Beckham. No question. When you're labeled the next Randy Moss, when you have hands like Jerry Rice, there's a reason why. And he had that potential too. So going into his freshman year, didn't have a lot of stats, only put up almost 400 yards of receiving. So it was okay, but he had a lot of off the field issues. He just could not mature as a young man. He ends up having some drug-related problems. His sophomore year ends up almost going for over 800 yards. I think he had 30 or 40 catches during that year as well. But there was an incident in which he allegedly forced open an apartment door and pushed around a woman and pushed her down a flight of stairs. That right there just ended his career at Missouri. So he tried to transfer elsewhere. Unfortunately, that never went through. I think he transferred to Oklahoma and ended up spending some time on the practice squad. But after that, it was done. So he ends up somehow, some way, gets drafted in the second round and spends only 2 years in the NFL. I think he spent one with the Eagles and one with the Titans. That was it. I think it was because of the issues that he had off the field. This is a cautionary tale for every young athlete. You are being put on a national landscape, and if you do something stupid like this, that's going to derail your career at the end of the day. Going to Alabama, there's not a whole lot of guys that you would think Nick Saban has missed, but he's missed on a few. They had one offensive lineman that was in 2008. I think he was a 4 or 5 star. Fortunately, just never came on the field. But in 2019, there was a guy by the name of Antonio Alfano. His story is unbelievably ridiculous. So, going into his freshman year, he dressed out for a few games and then all of a sudden entered the portal in the September of that same year. So, what happened? Well, he stopped coming to class. He stopped going to workouts. He stopped going to meetings. And eventually, when he went into the portal, Nick Saban had a press conference and basically told the press that he quit on the team. He stopped doing the little things right. He stopped doing what he wanted to do. So his career was weird. He transferred to Colorado, ended up getting suspended for a few months, got reinstated, hit the portal again, went to Independence Community College, doesn't play that entire year, and I think this is 2021 right now. He ends up transferring to Lackawanna, plays 2 years. And then earlier back in November of 23, he was reported and he tweeted out that he had offers from LSU, Florida, Alabama again. And he ends up getting drafted in the CFL, so he signs a contract. It makes me wonder whether those offers were legit or not, because he just tweeted it out. There wasn't a whole lot of people that noticed this as well. There were only a few reports, but if it was real, he would have tagged some guys a lot more than just the coaches. He would have tagged rivals or anybody like that, and there would have been a report. However, nobody came out and said, no, we didn't. We never offered him. So I really don't know what his situation was, but overall, this guy had a lot of personal issues, struggled internally. I think he dealt with the death of a family member, and that really kind of messed him up. So he ended up leaving, trying to go back home and just finding a better home for him, I guess. So, going on to the Auburn Tigers. In 2015, there was a guy that I think ESPN rated him the best player in the class of 15, but 247 has him rated as the number 7 guy. It's Byron Cowart. Cowart was a stud coming out of high school. This guy, I think ESPN did a little segment on him as well whenever they talked about his career, about how good he was, about his little personal story. It was fun to watch as well. But he was quoted during, I think, 4 years ago or so. And this is what he said. Really, just am I going to take ownership, or am I going to point the finger at somebody else? Is it this person or is it that person? In reality, it was just me. I didn't have the IQ coming out of high school. I was bigger and stronger than everybody. I didn't understand it at the time. I'm just thinking you wake up, practice a little bit, and it happened in the game. I didn't know the preparation that it took to be good on Saturday and Sunday. And that was what his career was about, because he never just could get into the film room. He talked about guys like Montavious Adams, Carl Lawson, guys that ended up being all SEC, all-American guys. And they talked about how dominant they were during their time. And they saw the little things that they did. Sadly, Cowart didn't do all that. He ends up transferring to a JUCO and then plays at Maryland. Got it drafted by, I believe, the Dolphins, I want to say. But now he's with the Chicago Bears. Has he done anything? Not really. But, I mean, this is a guy that if he had just had the IQ and the will to just be better in the film room, we're looking at a first-round draft pick, because he had the talent. And whenever he was at Maryland, he showed why he was a great player out of high school. He did exceptionally well. But unfortunately, it just wasn't enough at the end of the day. So going on to the Florida Gators, Ronald Powell. First of all, let's give our respects to him. Passed away in January. Unknown why he passed, but great player, great human being, and we send nothing but condolences to his family as well. So he is probably one of the biggest what-ifs in recruiting for the SEC on this list. He showed a lot of potential whenever he was healthy. Finished off his career with 11 sacks. His 2011 season was probably his best one. I think he finished with 32 tackles or so. He had 11 TFLs and 6 sacks. So going into his junior year, he's ready for a breakout year. And then all of a sudden, boom, tears his ACL. And then he goes to rehab. He's going to get better. He's going to be ready for at least October. And then, boom, tears it again. So now he's back to square one. Misses the entire 2012 season. Missed out on what could have been a much better Florida team. Probably could have been a national championship team and an SEC championship caliber team as well. His 2013 year, I mean, you saw the lack of explosiveness and the lack of power that he had because of that ACL tear. Did finish with 4 sacks and 26 tackles. Only started 8 games out of 11. I think he did play in the all 11 games, but I mean, when you only start 8, you're not getting a lot of playing time and you're not giving enough time. Honestly, this was a time for his body to continue to heal from the ACL tear, but you saw that there was a lack of explosiveness whenever he came out of his stance, and it just wasn't enough for him. Did ended up getting drafted by the Saints, but didn't do much. After 2 years in the NFL, ended up getting cut. Got signed by the Orlando Apollos of the AFL. Then they folded, and after that, he was out of football from then on. Do wish him Nothing but continued prayers as his family may continue to mourn throughout his passing. Now, for the Tennessee Volunteers, for the Lane Kiffin era back in 2009, it got off with a bang when they got the number one back in Bryce Brown. There was a lot of stories surrounding this dude. There was a whole website and workouts, his recruiting, a news media request. They were handled by a guy by the name of Brian Butler. Apparently, this guy was his manager and his trainer as well. So he sold updates of his recruitment by a website for $9.99 a month. And he also sought contributions that he said were used to take players on a tour of colleges each summer. Come on. We all know what happened. So eventually this led to the NCAA getting involved. And whenever initially Brown decided to follow his brother Arthur Brown and go to Miami. But he never signed a letter of intent on National Signing Day the very next year. So he had decided to plan his decision on March 16th, despite the oral commitment to Miami. And he ended up committing to Tennessee, took a visit 3 days before the official decision. So before that as well, Tom Luganville said that if I was Randy Shannon and the Miami staff, I would tell the kid and Brian Butler to go jump in the league. I got to imagine that deep down, Miami's coaches have to be thinking, this is getting ridiculous. It kind of reminded me of when Zach Evans took a while. He was the number one back in the class of 2020. He ended up committing to TCU and then transferred to Ole Miss. That kind of reminded me of his shindig that he had. So, according to the Palm Beach Post, Coach Shannon called Brown on Tuesday and allegedly told him that the University of Miami was no longer interested in his services. However, Brown later told the Wichita Eagle that Shannon still wanted him to be a Hurricane. So going into the year, Brown had a lot of hype surrounding him. He spent the season as a backup to Montario Hardesty, finished the season second on the team in rushing. In the first day of the 2010 spring practice, after Lane Kiffin decided to leave the Vols, he ends up leaving the program. So Derek Dooley ended up saying that he's just going to be at Tennessee the rest of the spring semester. He ends up following his brother Arthur to Kansas State. Arthur ends up having a great year. Meanwhile, Brown didn't even see most of the field. He only carried the ball 3 times for 16 yards as a fourth option running back. And then a couple weeks after that, he left the Kansas State program temporarily and then entered the NFL draft. Kind of odd, don't you think? But he had a great combine, ran a 4.48, had a 7-second 3-cone, had a 30-foot 4-inch vert, 9'9" broad, 22 reps on the bench. Ended up somehow getting selected in the 7th round. Got a 4-year contract. His only best game in the NFL finished off with over 100 yards on Monday Night Football, set an Eagles record for a rookie. And the very next week, he rushed for 169 yards. But ended up fumbling late in the fourth quarter. He was okay for 2 games, but overall, not too bad. That was really it for his career. Bryce Brown could have been a much better player if he had just had his head on straight and if he didn't let the fame get to him. Overall, this is a pretty big bust. Now, for the Kentucky Wildcats, there's no one that stands out more than Drew Barker. He was one of the crown jewels in Kentucky's 2014 recruiting class. Here's a guy that in his senior year threw for 33 touchdowns along with 2,600-plus yards and also added 9 touchdowns and 840-plus yards on the ground. So when he committed to Kentucky in 2014, it was a huge steal for the Wildcat faithful. You thought, this is going to be a team that is led by this guy that can be a difference maker in the air raid offensive system that was perfect for him because Hal Mumme was the air raid father that was at Kentucky. So it's only noteworthy that he could go there and could perfect the air raid system. But unfortunately, he didn't see the field in his first 2 years until 2016. But unfortunately, a back injury would sideline him for the rest of the year, which made way for Kentucky's option offense to really evolve. And it got worse for him going into 2017 when Terry Wilson came from the junior college level. And it was over with once they changed their offensive philosophy. Barker ended up initially deciding to go to the portal, but ended up staying at Kentucky, but just decided to give up on football. So there's a lot of things that could have happened during his career that could have worked out for the better. Just unfortunate that talent and injuries derailed his career. So going on to the Georgia Bulldogs, the final SEC team on the list, that's Trenton Thompson. The number one overall player in the class of 2015 is certainly one that had a strong freshman year and then disappeared off the map. His story is quite complex. So, starts off his strong year. He was labeled as one of the best interior top freshmen defensive linemen in the SEC. And after that, that was basically it. Struggled with ankle injuries. There were reports that he was addicted to pain pills. Of course, this is unconfirmed at this point. This is only according to a couple of Reddit posts and a couple of little news outlets. Ended up taking a semester off from Georgia. So after Mark, and remember, this isn't during the Kirby Smart era. This is during the Mark Richt era. After Richt leaves to go to Miami, when Kirby Smart came in, Thompson was just never one of his guys. He was never one of those guys that Smart could rely on. I mean, and understandably so. He wanted to focus on his new recruiting class. He wanted to focus on his new guys that he had coming into Athens. He did ended up getting some playing time, played a good bit during the national championship game. Ended up leaving early to go to the draft, which was a terrible mistake. Ends up going undrafted, doesn't make a couple teams, only bounces around practice squads. There's no telling what his career could have been if he had just been healthy and if he had just been a consistent force whenever he was at Georgia, because he was supposed to be a difference maker. There's no question about it. He was supposed to lay the foundation for the Jalen Carters and the Jordan Davises of this new Georgia generation. But obviously, that wasn't the case. So, am I missing any bust? Let me know in the comments down below. Do appreciate everybody tuning in. Who is your pick for the biggest bust on this list? Let me know as well. Thank you guys for listening in. SEC Unfiltered. Make sure, like, share, and subscribe. Turn on the bell notifications for every video that we drop so you don't miss out on anything. We're almost there. It's almost football season, 85 days away. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys on the next video.